Hi there, it's Ian here, and you're watching Grumpy Opinions, the show where I'm going to tell you all about what I think of films, TV shows, games, and life in general.
Outlander is the Starz TV series based on the books by Diana Gabaldon, all about the Fraser family and the Mackenzies, and all their adventures in the 18th century. Episode 10, Mercy Shall Follow Me, starts off with Eragon and Pippin meeting up in a brothel to discuss business, and the business being him stealing Jemmy, and by extension managing to get his hands on Jocasta's fortune. Meanwhile, Roger, Bree, Claire and Jamie are off in Wilmington, and they're planning their own scheme to get Bonnet, and they're going to do him in. And Ian's going to pretend to be this fabled A. Malcolm character, and all while they go off to lie in wait, but they end up coming up empty after a wee fight. And Bree and Claire go off shopping for syringe parts, finally, and then they go for a stroll down by the beach and see some whales playing out offshore. And it must be a bad omen, because a couple of minutes later Bonnet appears, and he's like, "Oh hi Claire, remember me?" And he grabs her, and then Bree runs up to help, but because of plot, her gun doesn't fire, and then Bonnet ends up bopping Claire on the head, and then does the same thing to Bree when she flails at him, leaving Claire to wake up alone, and then regroup with Jamie and Roger somewhere down the road. And Bree wakes up at Chateau del Bonnet, and he's all like, "Hey, now that we're totally pals, you're going to teach me how to be a great dad and a proper gentleman." And she's like, "Wait, no, okay, whatever you say, boomer."
Okay, boomer, yeah, boomer, whatever you say, boomer.
And then they do some dining, and she pretends to read him a book, and says that it's actually Moby Dick, and talks about vengeance and life and all these things, and Bonnet ends up opening up with a few snippets of a sob story about what happened when he grew up. And then she says, "Okay, it's bedtime," and he actually plays a gentleman and goes away. But the next morning he makes a big fancy breakfast, all served by the prostitute at the brothel, and she plays along and tells him that she needs to go and get Jemmy and get some things from home, and he's like, "Sure, let's seal it with a kiss," and she does. But he might not be able to see through some of the reading malarkey, but he spots a fake bit of passion straight away and gets proper annoyed, and he does a bonk on the prostitute and makes Bree watch. After that, Bree begs the lassie to help, and she's like, "Nah, he's a good customer, it's not worth the risk of him killing me." And then she toddles off home, only to meet up with Claire and Jamie, who got the brothel address off Poncy McTerrifying in a back alleyway, which sounds like the beginning of a bad joke. And Claire earns her trust by telling her how to sort her back out with some shoes from the title clip, and then she lets on the secret location of Bonnet's house, and just in time, because Bonnet's right in the middle of trying to sell Brianna to ship's captain when the cool gang come in guns blazing, and Roger chases Bonnet up a wee hill and does a couple of punches on him, and then they tie him up, but instead of killing him they decide to take him to Wilmington to get justice, knowing that they've got a favour owed off trial, just in case Bonnet's managed to get some local influence that would get him out of the hangman's noose. Meanwhile, Jocasta called Forbesy the Hobbit to her house to make a few changes to her will, and he's like,
"Oh really? How interesting."
while checking out the stuff around the house with an appraising eye, until she starts talking about quite how much money she wants to give away, and it's loads, and he starts losing the plot, and ends up trying to do a kind of murder rage with a pillow on her, only for Ulysses to bust in and basically snap his neck like a twig. And luckily, Joe isn't for getting dead today, so everything's fine there. And it must be a week for killing off baddies, because the court case clearly went well, and Bonnet ends up getting staked out to the sea to drown as the tide comes in. And just as sure as Jamie promised him, the last thing he sees before his brains go splat is Brianna looking down the barrel of a rifle at him. Justice is served. So what did I think? Well, I thought this was actually a decent enough episode, although I can tell you now, I did have a lot of issues with it. And before any of that, there's some good stuff I really want to talk about as well. I mean, for starters, I think all the actors deserve a hand for doing really solid work this week, often with not a massive amount of things to work from in the script, and in the case of Sophie and Ed, with a really, really difficult scene to play out on difficult multiple levels. The Bonnet and Bree stuff really is the episode, it's kind of the centrepiece of everything, and effectively the pair of them are running the entire gamut of acting emotions, with Skelton having to act scared, angry, coy, polite, and half the time trying to play every emotion and beat on two different levels, both the real level that Brianna's feeling and the level she's trying to pretend for Bonnet. And Spielers is playing a kind of dangerous maniac, but he's changing his entire persona every other couple of minutes, everything that happens, and he's also got this kind of emotional vulnerability that keeps playing through him. And I think both of them do really good work here, and it's really kind of sad that, seeing that how good the work Ed Spielers has been doing, that the show barely found any reason to feature him most of the season. And this week he's essentially a one and done villain of the week, and it kind of makes you wish they'd found a lot more for him to do during the show. But no, I mean, anyway, that's him away, so cheers, Eragon. And as I said, the stuff with Bree was also really interesting, especially having her that close to a rapist and then actually have to watch him have sex with somebody else only a few meters away. I mean, that's going to bring up really horrible emotions, and it's a strange and difficult place for an actor to go to, and I think that she actually pulls it off really well. And there was some really nice moments with the rest of the cast. I mean, especially, I love the little exchange between Roger and Jamie.
"If you fall, Roger Mac, no, I will avenge you. And if you fall, I will avenge you. A bargain, is it?
A rare bargain indeed.
I mean, that little kind of, we get the sense that they finally see each other, as equals, or at least, on some kind of level. And I also loved that they managed to get back Poncy McTerrifying, even if it was just for a wee cameo. And also Billy Boyd, playing Forbes. I mean, also doing the most Scottish thing ever. Now, honestly, this is about the most Scottish way of answering a question and not paying attention, and it genuinely had me laughing.
Oh, really? How interesting. Well, yeah, it's lovely.
And I also liked the fact that there was that moment when Ulysses said, breaking through that kind of class barrier, master-slave thing, and actually saying her name. And it was sweet that was what brought her back from the brink of kind of being suffocated, which was nice. I mean, it doesn't really make a lot of sense, but it was kind of nice. And I think that's the problem with a lot of this episode. A lot of it is an awful lot of rushed ideas, and ideas that seem to be just slightly silly and cheesy, and in a tired Outlander-specific kind of cliched way. Now, I don't want you to get me wrong, because as I said, this episode was decent enough, but that's kind of all it was. It was mediocre, it was decent, it was okay. And I think that was kind of a combination of a lot of factors, one of which is that after all the last few episodes relating to things like Alamance and the fallout from that, Roger's recovery from his hanging, Ian's return and his depression, and then suddenly out of nowhere we're straight into like a Bonnet plotline, and it's suddenly all way too much at once. And the pacing this week was kind of all over the place. I mean, at the start it was okay, it started out slow with obviously the scenes of both teams planning things out against each other. And that was great. And then there was the really obvious reversal. And it was obvious because, I mean, what was this scene? What was the dialogue in the scene with Claire and Bree talking about essentially nothing, talking about seashells? I mean, now that was a total alarm bell moment for me because that felt like characters talking about nothing and talking about nothing that drives the story forward. And usually that's a sign that either it's a bad script, it's been poorly written, or because they're filling time because something's going to happen. And that much, it was very much the latter. The fact that all their scenes were there talking about effectively nothing, and then cutting back and forward to like Jamie and Roger, really made it obvious what was going to happen to me. And the way it was put together, I knew Bonnet was coming because you only ever saw the boat from a distance, and they steadfastly refused to show him sitting on the boat. And it made it really clear that he wasn't on the boat because of that. That's not what this show does. This show loves to show its villains. It loves to show its actors, because it knows the audience wants to see them. And unless it's a great big reveal with like something like Graham McTavish turning up as Buck the other week, that was a situation when they would do something like that. Matt Roberts even said in the commentary that wasn't originally the way the episode was cut, though they were originally going to show him. So it gave everything a kind of a bit of a rushed feeling this week. I mean, it was a bit like it was constipated and trying to get everything out all at once. And I'm not complaining because they did give the Bonnet and Bree scenes a lot of time, and that was fine. But then they jammed them all together in the middle of the episode in a lump, including this bit where it suddenly cut from night time to the next morning, straight, like, right back together. And it felt like there should have been something between those moments. Like, that should have been when it cut away to a different scene of Jamie and Claire or something. But it didn't do that, and that was jarring, and it felt like you were getting too much of that at once. I mean, really what I feel like is that this should have all taken place over 2 episodes, and there should have been a B plot that was filling everything out. Like the Jocasta stuff should have actually taken a lot more of the plot, but it didn't, and that ended up just being a 5-minute thing. And the other side of that was that the scenes with Pippin going straight from being fine to like murder guy in about 2 seconds in the living room of the person he's talking to, that just seemed kind of crazy, because on top of it, the obvious, I mean, Forbes is actually a lawyer. Presumably he would actually know lawyery ways to either delay the will or to lose it or something else to happen so that he didn't have to like straight up murder in the middle of the parlour, even if he was in a bad mood. And it seemed to come out of absolutely nowhere, and it seemed purely there because they wanted to kill off this character. And it felt like part of the problem with this is they never really explained his character properly. He's only been in it a couple of times. You don't really know the guy. And most of his scenes this season have been sitting in a tea house, a bar, or somewhere else, like chatting to Bonnet about some stuff or doing kind of paperwork. And we really just don't know the guy. So there's no suggestion of him being this kind of person. In fact, he seems quite opposite. And on top of that, you're telling me that Ulysses managed to hear that bell, but he never heard any of the other noise. He never heard like the scuffle, the raised voices, or any of that stuff. And that seems unlikely. And another logistical issue, and this is one that just came up kind of randomly, was that they mentioned Bonnet's hideaway was in Ocracoke. And I ended up looking it up because I was like, I don't know where that is. And it turns out it's this wee island here. And Wilmington is over here. It's about 150 miles away, which is probably about 250 kilometres. I'm not sure exactly. But the way it's been shot and done, it looks like Bree's been at Bonnet's place for maybe 2 days. Like, she woke up, they had a day, and then there's the next day everything else happens. But a voyage of 150 miles isn't nothing in those days. It would take a while. And we're supposed to assume that Eppie the hooker got all the way from Ocracoke back to Wilmington and then met up with like Jamie and Claire, and then like the cool gang managed to row all the way from Wilmington in a boat back to Okokook, 150 miles, and all of this took place over one day. I mean, let's face it, the fisherman was probably selling them a rowing boat. I don't believe that fisherman's going to be selling them a 3-mast tall ship for basically, a suit and a hat. Now bear with me, but your top speed according to Wikipedia for a rowboat is about 8 miles an hour, which means to travel 150 miles is going to take you just under 19 hours. Now that's at top speed, and presumably that's with everybody taking turns and keeping it going for almost an entire day at like top athlete level rowing. Now, fair enough, Jamie and Roger, they're not wee guys. Ian, fair enough, and Claire's not unfit. So let's say, for example, they managed to do that, and they're leaving from Wilmington, and presumably because they must be, because that's where Ian bought the boat. Unless they stuck it in the back of the wagon and rowed all the way there. But then they turn up on like Craggy Island, and they all just look totally fine, not like people who just completed a solid almost 20-hour athletic marathon between them. And if they didn't do it that way, why didn't they show them going there in like the wagon? Or making some kind of journey. I mean, it just seems kind of crazy. I mean, we're Game of Thrones final season levels of people teleporting all around the map. And on top of that, it's kind of lucky that Sophie managed to guess that Bonnet couldn't read, based solely on that one little look he gave when she mentioned him reading. I mean, he might have just been bad at reading or dyslexic or not really wanted to. He might have picked up that book and gone, that doesn't say Moby Dick. I'm just saying it was convenient. I mean, I actually liked the idea of her telling him the story of Moby Dick. I thought that was quite interesting and tied in with a bit of the whales earlier on. But I do feel it was a little bit on the nose because, everybody goes to Moby Dick when they want to do revenge stories and things. I mean, but they still didn't take it as far as Star Trek. And on a more technical side, there was stuff like when Bonnet was actually getting drowned, they did this sort of weird thing where they made like the water look deeper at one point, but it looks like it was exactly the same shot at the same time of day. They've just sort of CGI'd the water to be deeper or something. I mean, it just seemed odd to me. There was something a bit off about it. I mean, maybe I'm just wrong. It's just the lighting looked funny. But also, there was the editing of the fights. I mean, there was 2 or 3 wee fights in this, and they were all edited funny. And some of it did that kind of choppy in-camera effect that they use, like at the beginning battle of Gladiator. Now, I mean, that's kind of, if they did it that way, then that's been a choice on the day by the director or the director of photography. And I think that just looks a bit naff. But also, the fights just, they weren't exciting. They were kind of just disappointing. And that made the ending feel a bit disappointing because I wanted more. I mean, this horrible bit of Roger and Bonnet climbing up this hill was so... I mean, it was kind of pathetic. And then they caught Bonnet and it just dragged on and dragged on and dragged on and dragged on. And then finally get shot. And then that was the one good bit, because you actually felt like that was a bit of fitting closure. But they could have just shot him on the beach and it would have been just as good. This episode was also Pete Galbadon, and the only thing that was kind of missing from it was somebody being violently sexually assaulted at some point, because she loves to put that in. Now, okay, I know, herself wrote these books, and, everyone has a style, every author has kind of a style, and what I mean is that this episode felt really like a throwback to the stuff from like season 1, early bits of season 2, when it was much more of a kind of a larger-than-life villains kidnapping people, and a lot more of a sort of bodice ripper adventure story than the kind of time traveller historical drama that the show's turned into. And it were more like the show has actually evolved into that over time. And I can only speak for me, but I felt that this felt really kind of trite and a bit naff and cheesy to be back in these days. I mean, it reminded me of stuff like Jamie storming Fort William and stuff. Now, I mean, sure, that's an essential part of the early show, but I do feel like that we've moved on from that kind of stuff. And bottling all this kind of stuff into this one episode with all this piratey Bonnet stuff concentrated that cheesy feeling. I mean, I felt like I was watching Black Sails, but even Black Sails was usually a bit more serious than that. And I felt like as an audience, the show has actually grown past that. I mean, shows evolve and they change, and it's not always as much fun, and some people like new bits better, and some people like them worse. I mean, God knows the amount of people who hate this season of Westworld because they're no longer in Westworld at all. A lot of people just haven't been enjoying it. But I actually like the fact that this show has been changing into a bit more of a drama. And the big thing this episode brought up with me is kind of a more interesting story one. You see, because the other thing it's done is essentially it's done away with all the main villains of this season in one fell swoop. I mean, Bonnet, who's our 2-season-long big bad, he's been killed off. And you had your mini bad, Forbes, and he's been killed off as well. And we're now moving into the final 2 episodes. But there's no actual plot to take us into the final 2 episodes. There's no overarching story of this season. There's no big, long, ongoing thing that this is going to do. I mean, think about season 1. It ended with the escape from Blackjack and getting Jamie away and getting him back in his right mind before they went to France. And that was tying up a big, long story. Season 2 was all about like the Culloden stuff, cutting back to the other stuff that was going on and Claire realising she can go back. Season 3, that was tying up the sort of the Gayless plot line and then them getting home only to end up being stranded. And then season 4 was like tying up the Roger storyline and them getting home to Bree and the baby. All of these seasons, there was long established things that had been going on for a big part of the season, and then they got tied up. Now this season, we're 2 episodes for the end, and there's literally no storylines left. I mean, I don't think there's any outstanding plot threads at this point. I mean, sure, they can have something happen. I mean, I'm sure something's going to go on with it. I'm pretty sure, actually, I watched the next week on, and I think I saw the Browns on it. But the Browns aren't an ongoing character in this. They're just some people they met. They've had their bit of their argument with them, and that's over. I mean, there's no reason for them to come back into it at this point in the story. Literally at the 11th hour to be introducing a new big main villain seems kind of daft. It's a flat end to things, and I don't think they really want to be doing that. It's not usually a great look. And I think this season has had a bit of a problem with that all along, with things being bitty, things being a bit monster of the week, and that's definitely come up more times than this. And people have said that there's a lot of that to Fiery Cross as a book, that it's kind of a lot of little scenes, a little of vignettes, as they say, of little story bits that just kind of happen episodally throughout the book. And there's nothing wrong with that in a book, but I just feel like ending a season on a brand new thing, it could be really bad. I mean, I presume it's going to be set up for ongoing plot that leads into the next book, which obviously will lead into the next season on this. And I do want to say, my bookie pals, I don't want spoilers. Don't tell me what's going to happen. And I'm sure they're champing at the bit to say, oh, but Ian, you should know about this thing. But I'd say, as a show watcher, this feels like it's probably going to be a bad idea. It feels like, it could be a really good one. Obviously I'll wait and see how exciting the next 2 episodes are. But on the face of it, I'm just not sure this is a good move. But yeah. So till next week, I've been Ian, and these have been my grumpy opinions. And a wee shout out to Michelle Forbes, my top tier patron. You really make it all worth it. Thank you so much. I just, I love the fact that people actually enjoy this to that extent. So everybody just keep safe and stay well. I love yous all. Everyone take care. Bye bye.